Mere 1.5 months after the beginning of its war against Ukraine, Russia tried to strike Germany by using its gas supply. The aim was to cut off hundreds of communal suppliers, which would mean that hundreds of thousands or even millions of households would not have been able to heat their houses, as well as 700 gas-powered power plants. All of them were supposed to shut off, surprisingly, by Gazprom simply turning off the gas. We'll talk about the developments along the front line of the war in Ukraine, as well as about background things like this in this situation report. While the expected big air offensive from Russia hasn't started yet, the intensity of the strikes that are continuing seems to slowly increase. So a couple of days ago, I think it was from the 5th to the 6th of December, 50 Shahed drones were used in one single night. 2 nights ago, it was 7 Shahed, but also 6 S-300, as well as 19 Kh-101 cruise missiles, as well as 1 Iskander-M ballistic missile. So for the first time in months, the Russians were using a bigger number of cruise missiles again. On the Eastern Front, we have fighting close to Sinkivka, and here at Petropavlivka in this direction, the Russians claim that they had some advances there, that they managed to achieve some advances. I cannot confirm this at this moment. The fighting is also continuing further east, and here we have another Ukrainian success. The Ukrainians managed to recapture that strip of territory here close to Ivanivka. This has happened twice already, so this is obviously considered to be very important for the Ukrainian defense, as they counterattacked with serious forces enough to recapture it every time they lose it. We'll have to keep an eye on this in the future. Further south at Novoselivske, fighting is also being reported, and there are 2 other major points of fighting, that is towards Terny and in the Serebryanske forest. Again, some claims of successes, but I cannot confirm any further successes by the Russians. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we see a growing intensity of the fighting, more or less from Terny to the north of Bakhmut. It seems like the Russians are trying to push the Ukrainians out of that area here, with Seversk in the center, not only from Dibrova in the Serebryanske forest, but the fighting has intensified close to Bilohorivka, Spirne, Vesele, and close to Rostolivka as well. So we see significant enough Russian attacks all around this front line over the last few days, where the front line has been less active in the past few months. Further south, we have continued Russian attempts to push towards Bodanivka. Russians claim some successes. I cannot confirm this. We have additional fighting towards Klishivka and Andrivka. Here we have the Russians actually being successful, and there is, wait, that's the wrong one. There is a video, a picture here. We have a Ukrainian mill blogger admitting defeat at this point. And as you know, I take the admittance of defeat of the own side more serious as claims than for own success. And if we look at this here, according to him, the Russians have already advanced up to this point, as we can see here on the deep state map as well. So the half of Klishivka is already threatened at its flank from the ridgeline here, where the Russians keep pushing forward. Should they be able to continue this advance, there will be probably the need for the Ukrainians to give up Klishivka in the near future, but at least as of now, we haven't reached that point yet. Ukrainian counterattacks happened at various parts of this front line here, but all of them failed. I cannot record a single success by the Russians. By the Ukrainians. Further south at Avdiivka, we have more information about the troop composition. By now, the 23rd, 47th, and 116th Mechanized Brigades are now being confirmed to operate around Avdiivka. This shows us that 3 well-equipped units from the Ukrainians are now being rushed in to defend Avdiivka. All 3 of those Mechanized Brigades have before been fighting in the south. So basically confirming that any counteroffensive activities by the Ukrainians in the south have now more or less stopped, where with their serious parts, the mechanized elements have been moved away to defend at Avdiivka. The Russians managed to advance somewhat here along the railroad line. Roughly this area here fell into Russian hands over the last few days. The Russians also managed to advance here where the water treatment plants are. They gained a few more meters south. In the last video, I already confirmed the Russians to be here, and now we have them moving further south here in the Dacha areas where they've also been before a while ago. I also have a fresh where they've been in the north in the last situation report. That was what I meant to say. I also have a fresh geolocalization here in the industrial area. We have a video of Russian positions, and you can see them here at that point. Now this is the big building here, and that is the big building, and that is it on the deep state map. So this is the top one, this is the center one, and this is the long one. And they are more or less almost down from that top one. So they are more or less here now. We see them slowly creeping forward inside of the industrial area, slowly advancing there, but still advancing after all. Other than that, we have Russian attacks at Siverne, Upitne, and Pervomaiske. No success recorded here. Ukrainian counterattacks also happened. I cannot confirm any fresh successes. Fighting in Stepove is also continuing. The Ukrainians recently counterattacked here, but at best they managed to kick out the Russians from 2 or 3 houses roughly in this area. We definitely know that the Russians are still in this part, but the Russians themselves also confirm that the Ukrainians are still in the western part of the town itself. So the situation there seems to be more or less stable. We also know the Russians have positions here now, so they have come closer to the coke plant, but I cannot confirm that they have entered it, so it seems to not be the case as of now, at the very least. Further south, Russian attacks at Krasnohorivka, Marinka, and Novomikhailivka. We have the Ukrainian counterattack again towards Marinka, and a Russian mill blogger, I quote a Russian mill blogger here, Ukrainian troops are not going to leave the destroyed city, so any claims that Marinka is now captured by the Russians are false. They are definitely still in the southern part, and they definitely control a bigger part north of that water here, of that lake here which is still a part of Marinka. Further west, we have additional fighting at the oblast border. The Russians were once more attacking Staromayorsk through the tree lines here. There's a report about fighting close to Uroshaine as well. I'm not fully able to confirm whether they actually attacked in this direction here or maybe from the east, or whether this is just meant in both ways, because it's still close to Staromayorsk and Uroshaine. And there have also been Russian attacks towards Solota Niva. Here, the Russians themselves admit it has been a failure, likely coming here from Novodonetsk. Also, again, the Russians failed. Further west, we have Russian attacks and Ukrainian counterattacks in the area south of Orikhiv. The Ukrainians attack at Robotine and at Verbove. No successes can be recorded, though. The Russians do counterattack, no successes either. But what we do have is a video here, and it's geolocalized here in an area that is now being considered to be under Russian control, at least more or less. And this is a Leopard 2 that the Ukrainians lost. Let me see if I can speed it up so we don't take that long. Not sure I can. Wait a moment. Yes, I was able to. Now we play it in twice the speed. No, so you don't need to wonder if it looks kind of weird. We see that it's a Leopard 2A4V, so the Ukrainian version with additional armor that has been hit by at least 2 FPV drones. And at the beginning we see ATGM hits on it. There was a reported loss of a Leopard 2, which was abandoned and then struck by the Russians with at least 2 ATGMs to make sure the Ukrainians can't reuse it again. And we obviously are talking about this tank now that is been visible here, and this is Russian soldiers now right in front of it. So they have effectively captured it. Here you see the Ukrainian version with a lot of contact 1 and rubber rubber mats for additional armor, thus the Leopard 2 A4V. This means they have captured it, but this doesn't mean they actually are able to use it for propaganda purposes yet, as the Leopard 2 is far heavier than any tanks the Russians have. It's doubtful that they can easily recover it. An armored recovery vehicle that is in Russian possession is not well suited to pull something beyond 60 tons. Usually their tanks are at like 45 to 50 tons, so this can be some troublesome for the Ukrainians. It would be easier as they have been delivered with Western ARVs, but in this case it's unclear whether the Russians will be able to capture it. Obviously, if they manage to hold that area here, if they manage to push the Ukrainians further away, they will find a way to recover it. But we also have to say that won't matter too much except for propaganda purpose. This is the A4 version, so it's from when? The 90s? 90s, late 80s. This is a version that was sold all over the world. The Russians should more or less know what it is about. Some of those A4s have been destroyed in northern Syria, so they might have had the chance even to inspect some wreckage, find find probes, find details about the exact composition of the armor. Nothing here will be revealing or troublesome from the producer's country side, but obviously it will allow the Russians to showcase a Western tank that they captured, maybe even displaying it in front of the German embassy and later obviously displaying it at Kubinka, which will be awesome for their propaganda, but that's all it's going to be good for. So no change south of Orechiv here. We go further to the Dnipro. Here also no change in the control of territory that can be confirmed. The Ukrainians are still attacking according to the Russians, and now and then they are advancing, but usually pushed back with artillery fire. At least those are the reports I find. A Russian mill blogger is writing that the Ukrainians are improving their fortifications now, which would indicate us that they aim to or expect to stay in Krinky for a fairly long time. And he said, again, I'm quoting, they will try to hold the bridgehead at any cost. According to the expectations of that big Russian mill blogger, the Ukrainians will stay on the left bank, and no matter how hard they're being struck. We talked about it in the last situation report about the huge number of Russian glide bombs being used in this area. According to the Russian mill bloggers, the Ukrainian will not just stay there. He also mentioned that it's possible that there will be additional landings at other points by them to try to gain additional positions and additional bridgeheads on the left side of the Dnipro. The Russians are also reporting that several of those landings were foiled, but they were talking about sabotage groups that were foiled. And if I interpret it rightly, I would expect we're talking about a single boat with like 5 to 8 men on top. So not a proper invasion, not something that seems to be an attempt to actually capture some ground, but the Russians claim that they foiled a number of those landing operations by sabotage groups. From the Crimea or from the Black Sea, the south, we have some information. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians avoid the western part of the Black Sea now after they've lost a Sukhoi 24M at the beginning of the week. It was shot down here close to the Snake Island, apparently operating here, probably trying to launch some cruise missiles in this area or patrolling, trying to intimidate the ships here. Maybe it strikes some Ukrainian patrol boats that are escorting freighters going towards Odessa, but having shot down that plane is supposedly, at least according to the Ukrainians, making the Russians avoid the western part of the Black Sea as of now. In the rear area, we have a news from Makivka. Here, in the last few hours, a big explosion happened. Initially, the talk was about a fuel station. Now, the later news are, even in pro-Russian media, that it was an oil depot that was struck by the Ukrainians. So they managed to destroy some logistical positions here in the rear area. From the troop generation area, we have some interesting or like telling stories from Russia as well. Now, in the last situation reports, we talked about Russia's attempts to use migrants as a weapon towards Finland. And as Finland fast closed its borders fast and efficiently, the Russians were stuck with those migrants. And now BBC Russia is saying that they try to recruit them for their armed forces. Not much of a surprise in this regard, obviously. Then Russian milk bloggers are claiming that the Russians managed to develop or are developing and have already started serial production on a helicopter drone, Termit, and it's going to have SA-8L missiles, 3 of them. Those missiles are laser guided and can either be guided from the helicopter itself or from a ground operator. They claim it has 300 kilometers of range, so much. Okay, but the interesting part is they claim it's going to be able for autonomous operations. Now, I'm not an expert for this. I understand the basic principle. I guess it's supposed to work with machine learning to allow the software on board understand how a target looks and then lock onto that and fire on it. And by geofencing, I guess the drone can be told, after this point you are allowed to engage, but not before, to avoid friendly fire. The advantage of a helicopter drone obviously is that it can be operated from anywhere along the front line. It doesn't need an airfield. It doesn't need much logistics that has to be permanently in place. It can be flexible in usage. Whether all of this is going to work is obviously a totally different question, which is out of my league, above my pay grade. I'm not able to say how far machine learning has developed, how well the Russians might be able to use this, but at least they claim it is going to work in the way that I just said to you, supposedly fully autonomous. With the 300-kilometer range, it would even allow them to fly deeper into Ukrainian-held territory and thus striking the rear areas, maybe even logistic transports, even troop concentrations where troop build-ups as well, far beyond the point where they would usually be able to strike with anything but cruise missiles. Then we have news from opposition media that in the Chechen Ahmad units, there were extremists serving that were in the Russian lists for extremists and terrorists. And after fighting there, the Interior Ministry has deleted them from the lists of extremists and terrorists. And in some cases, or in several cases, they even removed their entries into their criminal records after that. The GUR is also saying, the Ukrainian military intelligence is saying, that the Russians are trying to replicate the Ukrainian naval drones. I'm not sure for what purpose, whether they want to build them themselves or just to analyze them. This wasn't clear in the message to me, at least, but these are the records there. And we also still have continuous reports of the Russian authorities trying to recruit foreigners, migrants to their armed forces. Basically everyone who is threatened with deportation or everyone who has recently acquired citizenship. According to the reports, they're trying to push them into the military service. This I find basically every day. I find news about these topics. Also, we have a Telegram entry here that is supposedly showing ammunition from North Korea, and we can see. Now, we don't have to be an artillery expert to understand that this is probably not the way a properly designed shell is supposed to look like. So we see the inconsistency of this, and the comments, you can pause the video here if you want to read it yourself, basically confirms it, that it's causing trouble. We had the talks about, we talked about it in the past when the first time was mentioned that North Korea is going to sell a bigger amount of ammunition. When the North Koreans shelled a South Korean island, half of the shells didn't even hit the island, and of those that hit, 20% were dots, which is a extremely high quote ratio. So the expectations were that the shells are of subpar quality, and that seems to be confirming that. And then we have an article from Riba, which is mentioning a Washington Post article about the Ukraine's problem with draft dodgers. But while that article in itself might be interesting enough, there's another thing here that I just want to emphasize once more, because usually there is some amount of commenters here on the videos that are saying the Ukrainians are running out of men. I made a video about it, and obviously that didn't convince those people either. We have again Riba here saying the tone of the article should not deceive and create the false impression that the enemy has run out of men. Riba in the summer, so roughly 5 months ago, wrote publicly as well that Ukraine can still recruit 2 to 2.5 million men. So whatever you find about the numbers, whenever you see the claims that the Ukrainians are running out of men, even the biggest, the most prominent Russian mill bloggers don't believe that themselves. That should tell us enough about this, even though obviously there are problems and there are casualties, and there is no denying that, and there are political problems and organizational problems, and corruption is a problem. All of those are issues that Ukraine is facing, but what it's not facing is the fact that there are no more men. In the political sphere, we also have the repeated accusations. I also find that like every 2 days, so I don't add it to the situation report anymore. The accusations that Russia is deporting children and basically assimilating them by giving them into foster care for Russian families, by having Russian families adopting them. That's an ongoing theme all the time and is considered to be part of the genocide on the Ukrainians, as genocide doesn't just classify when you try to exterminate them by killing a certain group, but also by trying to get rid of their identity. And this is at least by some identified as an attempted genocide. And obviously taking Ukrainian children and raising them as Russians, making them think they are Russians, would classify as that as well. Also, in October, Russia has earned 11.3 billion US dollars through its oil sales. That's the highest amount since May of 22. So the attempts to cut off Russian funding for its oil obviously is not working as intended. We also have some news from the Russian RIA. Here in Kommersant, again, Russian media, this time state-affiliated media, they are saying that 2 officers have been sentenced to prison, 4 years in prison, because on an attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on a base in Berdyansk, I think it was, 7 personnel were killed and 15 items were destroyed. Now they are, I think one is a lieutenant colonel, and here we have lieutenant colonel and a major. Now there are some interpretations around that. That it's supposed to be a political sign and anything, but the article says that if a violation of the rules of combat duty to repel a surprise attack on the territory of the Russian Federation, at least this allows I'm not saying I'm right here, but this allows the interpretation that they might have been punished because they acted like they're still in peace, didn't spread out their units despite being in striking distance of Ukrainian armed forces that were still operating Tochka-U, short-range ballistic missiles that are fairly accurate enough to strike a target like this. And obviously at that point the Russian military should have understood that the Ukrainians aren't just lying down and accepting their fate. So dislocating, I'm not sure. No, that's probably wrong. There's a German word for military, dislozieren. I'm not sure if there's a direct English translation because it should come from Latin again. So it's probably used in English as well, but I don't know it. Nevertheless, so they didn't spread out the units. They left them concentrated. That would be my understanding. And let's be honest, if a commander fails his duty, becomes complacent and causes the loss of lives and of men, he should be punished. So this might be a political case. This might be a disciplinary case in regards to, I don't know, punishing somebody, not for the actual deed that he's done, but to show something, to make an example. Or this might just be the fact that 2 officers have utterly failed their duty, which led to needless loss of life and material that deserves to be punished. We don't know, at least I don't know from what I found. Also, Russia has confirmed that they're going to have the presidential election on the 17th of March 2024. This was to be expected. Now we have it official. We don't expect, but this allows us some time frame. It's highly unlikely that Russia is going to do something drastic before that. Now, that doesn't mean the attacks won't stop. That doesn't mean that the airstrikes might not happen. In fact, it might happen before that to show Russian might if needed, if the presidential government, the presidential leadership thinks it's needed. But another mobilization, for instance, is more or less out of the question before that, as this might cause some ruptures in the Russian society until then. Also, we have a Ukrainian group of human rights organizations that are accusing Russia to have settled the Crimean Peninsula with 800,000 Russian citizens since 2014, while at the same time 100,000 Ukrainians were incentivized or forced to leave the Crimean Peninsula, thus changing the demographics permanently, and also obviously making any peaceful solution that would include a referendum much, much harder and absolutely impossible to win for Ukraine, as even on the best of circumstances, it would have been tight for Ukraine nevertheless already. Also, we have, and that's the interesting part that we decided to lead here today with. Now, let me see, I can translate it to English, yes. Putin wanted to plunge Germany into chaos, and according to that, Gazprom wanted to cut off the gas for Germany on the 4th of April. And it was supposed to hit 500 huge customers, among them 250 communal works. This is communal works is a literal translation, which is wrong. They are more or less communal energy providers. So they might create their own electricity. They might also supply water. So they are usually like a company that is owned by the community, by the government of the city, for instance, but is separated to be a separate company for, I don't know, organizational reasons. And 250 of those were supposed to be cut off overnight, which meant that as they usually don't have their own gas storage, they would have, all their customers would have been without gas to heat their houses, to cook overnight. From that very moment on, 250 big industrial customers as well, among them chemical and steel plants, which could obviously lead to serious damages to those installations as well. And on top, it would have been for 700 gas-powered plants, which would then cut the German electricity production as well. All of this in April, when it was still cold, obviously with the expectation to cause a massive blackout. And some of you might have heard it, those estimations and the simulations always say when the blackout is big enough, the damage it takes is so big that you can't just switch it on again. It might take weeks, and it might cause complete and utter chaos in a society that has just-in-time logistics. So this could have been disastrous. And obviously, if the blackout happens in Germany and Germany starts pulling electricity from other connected countries, it might increase the area for the blackouts as well. So this could have been a insane strike on the European heating and electricity infrastructure. And according to the reports, it was thwarted by two whistleblowers inside of Gazprom Germania, I think is the name they used. So Gazprom Germany, that was responsible. They told the German government that their company is supposed to do that a couple of days before, and thus it was avoided. So highly interesting that Russia aimed to do that and plunged Germany into chaos. According to the reports, they expected the Germans to then rise up and demand from their government to basically have them make peace with Russia, so Russia supplies them with gas again. To which degree all of this is true is unclear, but the Handelsblatt, which they're referencing, is more or less an honest, serious publication. So it seems to be some truth to that, and quite impressive plan that the Russians apparently hatched here. Also, we have some news for international support. The Bulgarian parliament has overruled the president, so the 100 BTR-60 are going to come. They are old and obsolete, but still armored. Also, Russian mill bloggers are writing that Ukraine is going to receive Bulgarian SAMs, so surface-to-air missiles, supposedly only those that are in storage for no longer being usable. But as we know, Ukraine has a missile industry, so they might be able to refurbish them and put them back into service. Bulgaria has S-300, S-200 Kup and OSA, so various kinds of different systems that could potentially be used by the Ukrainians. The US are sending 175 fresh, a package of 175 million, a fresh package. AIM 9M Sidewinder. AIM-7, that's the Sparrow, a semi-active radar homing missile, probably for ground-to-air usage, not for air-to-air, obviously. HARM, the high-speed anti-radiation missiles. TOW, that's the anti-tank guided missiles. Javelin and 84, two more anti-tank weapons that are being delivered. Also, Ukraine and US have signed a letter of intent to the joint production of critical weapons, as it's called, and for the exchange of technical data. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said it would allow Ukraine to produce spare parts and thus allow for faster repair. So apparently those critical weapons are not actually weapons, but more focusing on spare parts in this part. Also, Germany has published its weekly delivery, and at least that makes it look a little better than it sounds. But that weekly delivery were 1,750 155 millimeter grenades, 10 reconnaissance drones, 70 grenade throwers, and 100,000 first aid kits that were freshly delivered to Ukraine. Japan is also offering aid, 4.5 million US dollars, 4.5 billion. 1 billion is going to go directly to Ukraine for humanitarian aid, and 3.5 billion are going to be used to guarantee loans to Ukraine for the World Bank, and thus effectively allowing Ukraine to gain 3.5 additional billions from the World Bank. And then we have finally an article from Financial Review, if I understand, then it's Australian, and it talks about the Australian FA-18 Hornets that are in storage. And according to them, after initial talks, there was a contract with a US company to use them for aircraft training, but as that contract has fallen apart, now it's up for discussions to give them to Ukraine again. What I have not been able to find out is if that contract was actually signed after the Ukrainians checked the planes and were talking with the Australians, if the Australians decided later to rather send it to a US company, or if that contract was already in existence before. But nevertheless, it says a condition report identified 14 of the 41 airframes in the best condition that could be readied within 4 to 6 months to make them airworthy and squeeze another 2 years of life out of them. And Australia has also sent fresh Bushmaster APCs, which are well liked within Ukraine. And that's it from me for now. If you like the situation report, then please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what you think about the supposed plan by Gazprom to plunge Europe, or at least Germany, into chaos. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting me. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.